multiple degrees and who has spent time in Ghana doing research and teaching, teaching
Yeah,
there,
teaching and researching.
and has been taking trips to Texas and New York and wherever within the last couple of weeks. I don't know if that had anything to do with her topic or not.
No, just my life.
And she's going to speak on Black children's literature. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I'm happy to be here. I really am. Especially when you've been lost. You're always happy to be where you're supposed to be after you've been lost.
You did get lost there.
Yeah, just a little bit.
I thought you weren't going to admit it.
Oh, no, I admit I'm lost all the time. Black children's literature is real important to me because I produced 3 black children. And at the time when my son, believe it or not, who's standing there, was a child, was a baby, and I can't even fathom that anymore. But he's going to graduate in 3 weeks with his bachelor's, so I'm so proud of him. So anyway, thank you, that's worth a clap. But at 20 too, that's what I really love, at 20 years old. It's a blessing. But anyway, when he was 3 years old, he was my inspiration for children's books. I went looking for books to fill his head, to make sure that there were images that were positive, that looked like him. And I wasn't finding them. And I was pretty upset over that. And the same books that I was looking for and finding actually were the books that I grew up with. And so that wasn't saying much about the production of black children's literature. So that started upsetting me, but then I produced 2 more. I have 2 daughters that are in, as you're saying, Massachusetts. I'm a commuter family. We're a commuter family now. My husband got promoted, so he's living in Massachusetts with my daughters. And I'm here. I know, it's 1,020 miles. And we can make it in 17 hours. Okay? But, well, actually, it's about 20 because we stop and everything, and we walk the dog. But they inspired me to look for black children's literature, black children's books, because I wanted to have their images seen in front of them to reflect it in the book. It's something that we have an issue with. We show the value of black children. We show our value in our books. We say how precious books are at all times. And when our children turn the pages, when our black children turn the pages, and all they see is white pictures, then that says they're not of value. And only white people and images are of value. So I was one of those people, as you can see, that didn't accept that. So I went and found books, as many books as possible, that had my children, that looked like my children. And not saying that I stopped reading white children's books, because I didn't, because I still think they're wonderful, but I also know my children are wonderful, and they deserve to see their own images. So, lo and behold, to make a long story short, I made the decision to go back to school. I went to grad school and studied black children's literature at the University of Iowa. And I was there thinking I was just going to get my master's and I was going to go back home and go back into education. I was an administrator there in Detroit. But something pulled me on and said, you got to get the PhD as well. And so I have a PhD in black children's literature out of the College of Education at the University of Iowa as well. So this is my presentation, and this is my dedication to my children, but also to all the children and to those who used to be children, which is all of you, of the history of black children's literature. Bless you. What's it doing? Does it pop?
Arrow's down on the bottom there.
No, I know. That's where it's supposed to be. Do you think it froze up? Hmm? Okay. Go back. It's not even acknowledging that it's a problem. Okay. For that. There you go. Yes. Graphic design, you get a BA, and I pay for that. I love this. I think this song is so precious. It was a song when I was small that had just come out, Nina Simone. And I think that it's just important that our children know these songs are for them. It's about self-esteem, and I realize when our children see everybody inside books, when they see all different colors, it's about self-esteem. And with having self-esteem, you're learning a lot more. You know what I'm saying? I think our children accomplish more when they have self-esteem and when they see their own images and when they're respected within the literature. Because a lot of times they don't want to read because it's nothing about them in the book. They say Johnny doesn't read or Malik doesn't read. And the whole thing is Malik reads. He's just not reading what you put in front of him. And if you put a black book sometime in a child's hand, that may be what they're looking for, just to eat up. In the beginning, before the new Negro, before the Harlem Renaissance, the images of black children and black people inside books were very negative. The images were derogatory. The themes and the titles were even so that you couldn't even understand the dialogue. A lot of times there would be a story about a little boy on a plantation, a little white boy on a plantation, but the black child that was raised with him would be talking like this. Everything you wouldn't understand anything you're saying, but the little white boy would be talking like he was coming from Oxford. So there was just a little difference. And they made sure to let white children, this was a building of white children's self-esteem, but for black children, this was not. And plus the fact the dialect was so negative and so unreadable that it was hard for these children even to concept. These are some of the illustrators of some of these books. Edward Kimball's is one of the big famous ones, his negative depictions of children. And this is one of the first issues of Uncle Tom's Cabin. These are also images. Whose baby is who? And this is a cartoon comic page from a little black Sambo during the same era, late 1800s, early 1900s. And the issue was that most of the time, early 1900s, it's supposed to be over. Black children were seen as creatures just a little bit above animals. I don't know how they got that over. Okay, we'll fix that later. But these are some of the images that were so seen at that time. And then along came the new Negro, the Harlem Renaissance, the era with W.E.B. Du Bois, and Jesse Fawcett, and the crisis in the NAACP. And through the NAACP, the Crisis magazine during that time that he created, he was one of the founders of, was created another book for children, another journal just for children, and it only lasted for 2 years. It was called the Brownies Book. And the Brownies Book was part of this way to educate the children so that they could be the new generation of educated children with things that were dedicated to them. So this is W.E.B. Du Bois and Jesse Fawcett, and these are some of the images of what's inside the book. In the 1930s, late 1920s, early 30s, there was a young black librarian in the Harlem, New York library, and her name was Augusta Baker. And Augusta Baker decided, along with several others, James Weldon Johnson, Arthur Schomburg, and a literary guild called the James Weldon Johnson Reading Guild, Literary Guild. And these people together decided that these images were so negative that they saw in these books, that their books were not for their children, that they wanted to collect and make a collection, a special collection just for black children. And so what they did was they took several years to get it together. They wrote petitions to publishers. They said, we want you to change the derogatory images of the bulging eyes, the big feet, the big lips, the caricatures that you're making of black people. We want that to be removed. We want you to remove the dialect. The we can't even read. It's just uneducated, uneducable. It doesn't make sense. And we want you to also remove the themes. The themes were wrong. Most of the time, it was a happy Negro on the plantation, and he was always happy to be working, happy to do all these things, or he was very miserable. So it was one or the other extreme. And so they wanted that to be all removed. So they started petitioning all these different publishers all over the United States. And New York was a perfect place for it because that was basically the publishing mecca. So they did that, and as well as they started collecting books that they thought were the top 40 that would be acceptable for black children. And James Weldon Johnson, we know James Weldon Johnson because of the Negro National Anthem. And it was amazing that it was this month when he wrote the Negro National Anthem, and I don't know if you all realize that he wrote it for President's Day. He wrote it for Abraham Lincoln's birthday. Yeah, and so he wrote it for that for his children at the school that he was the principal of, and his brother was teaching at as well. And his brother did the music, and he did the words. And they did it as a choir song, and it didn't catch on at the time, but when he started working with the NAACP, that's when it started to make the manifestation of the Negro National Anthem. So that's your FYI for today. Just another wonderful librarian, and I don't know if you all, anybody knew her or anything, but she's from the Chicago area, Charlie Mae Rollins. She was in the Chicago library. She also was one of the movers and the shakers to change the images of black children's literature. And she wrote several big educational organizations to tell them, look, you know, there needs to be a change. We need to start changing the way things are done. We need to have some books on black children. There's not any. They said we need to even have a collection, just a list of them. And one of the organizations said, well, you know what, why don't you do it? So the National Council of Teachers of English took on her challenge, and she wrote one of the books for them. This is Robert Samuel Johnson, who's out of South Carolina. And at the time of this whole era, he was a photographer, and he's a phenomenal photographer. A lot of people, you know, we see these pictures, but we don't know who to credit. If you see a lot of these pictures around, Walter D. Myers has 2 books, Brown Angel and I can't think of the second one, Little Brown Angel, and the second book to this. And these are all of his photographs. We're seeing a difference. What we see, and I don't have my last. Hey, my daughter gave me a little laser thing, and I forgot it today. The Little Boy and Chicken. That's part of the American imagery, American icon when it comes to photographs and talking about the American way. You always show part of your property. You see a lot of pictures in the 1800s, late 1800s or early 1900s, where all the family is sitting outside and their property is outside as well. Like they may have a piano and whatever else is very, of course, important to them to show their wealth. Well, that's one of those kind of pictures. Right here you see a picture which is of a school, and then you see these children in the bottom, which are pretty well-to-do. And it's amazing because it's a contradiction to the imagery that we see in Kimball and others that are saying how negative the pictures are at that time, or how negative blacks are. But we have kids who are in full suits and beautiful outfits, you know, and I always laugh and tell people, this is real fibers. You know, polyester wasn't made at this time. We're talking about silk and cotton, you know what I'm saying? So we're talking about children in very richly worn fabric and clothing. So it says that they had a little wealth. South Carolina at that time was not as poor as we think it is today, or we see it as today.
The poem is The Negro Speaks the Rivers.
And this is Langston Hughes.
It was written when I was 18 years old, just out of high school. It goes like this. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient of the world, and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and was always asleep. I looked upon the Nile and laid the pyramids from it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all gold in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusty rivers. My soul has grown deep like the river.
Langston Hughes is very important when it comes to children's literature. He is very important, and people don't realize, as well as they know Langston Hughes as a phenomenal poet, but he was also a phenomenal writer of children's literature. Langston Hughes basically wrote as many children's books as he did adult books. He wrote as many children's poems, almost as he did adult poetry. He was a very big advocate for children, but we only know him, and they only give him acclaim, basically, for what he's done in adult literature and poetry. But he has so many books that he's written himself for poetry. And one of his partners in his in his writing was Arna Bontom. And Arna Bontom and Langston Hughes wrote one of the first black children's books published in 1932. Now there were children's books, black children's books, written in the 1800s that you can find copies if you want to. Floyd's Flowers, you can't find them as much, but they're very expensive if you find them. But with a real publisher, this was the first public commercial publisher, not a black publishing company, but a commercial publisher. And this is about Poco and Fafina, and it was about just a story of children of Haiti. Langston Hughes was kind of world-renowned. You know, he had traveled a lot, a great deal, and so this is one of the stories he and Arna Bontom created. And at the same time, he also wrote a book of poetry during this in 1932 as well. Arna Bontom by himself wrote several books for children. Matter of fact, all his writing was almost for children. Golden Slippers, the story of George Washington Carver, Lonesome Boy, Bubba Goes to Heaven, and so many others. And he received the Jane Addams. I don't know if you know what the Jane Addams Award was, but at that time it's still very significant. He won the Jane Addams for diversity in his books. Connie Cullen was another Harlem Renaissance poet. And one of the things that people talk about with Connie Cullen, he did two things. He wrote about, well, three things. He wrote about the religion, he wrote about his culture, and they say he always wrote about the truth. Well, he wrote two children's books. He was a teacher at the junior high school, and his students asked him, you know what, we're having problems because your poetry is a little deep, and we really don't understand it much. Is there any way you can just interpret what you've gotten, you know, what you wrote for us? And so what he did was, he did in two books. The Lost Zoo is the first one that he wrote. And he was going home, and he just happened to stop by the zoo. And he stopped by the zoo and went through the zoo. And then when he got home, his cat, Christopher, said, "What took you so long?" And he said, well, he really didn't want to tell him that he had stopped by the zoo because, you know, Christopher was a little jealous and, you know, didn't like him looking at other animals. But he said, well, I just happened to stop by the zoo. Well, Christopher said, the zoo, huh? Well, I know the real story of how the animals got on Noah's Ark. Well, Connie Cullen said, really? Tell me. He said, well, because, you know, I'm an ancestor from one of those cats. I need to tell you the story. So he told him the story, and it ended up being a Lost Zoo. So it's written by Connie Cullen, but at first he gives credit to Christopher Cat. So that's how that started. And it's wonderful because he's telling, and it's about the truth, he tells about religion, and he tells about his race. And this is a book that's basically talking about all three. He uses different animals, the wake-up world. All the time, you know, a person that always wants to get everybody ready. They're that person that's telling you need to get ready, let's go. You know, they call you up and say, okay, we're supposed to be here by this time. Okay, let's do this, let's do this. Wake-up world got everybody else on the boat, but didn't make it themselves. Or sleep a mite more. And all they want to do is just sleep. Sleep all the time. And he just wanted to sleep just a mite more. And he slept. He was going to answer that invitation that Noah sent him, but he fell asleep. Because he was going to sleep just a mite more, and he just missed it. So he didn't get on the boat either. And there are several others. There's a great letter from the elephant asking not to have the mouse on. There's a group letter, a petition almost. They didn't want the skunk on. And the skunk sent another letter saying, please ignore those other people, those other animals, but I still want to get on. And he got a letter from, Noah got a letter from the mouse saying, please make sure to ignore Mr. Elephant's request, and then would you also put me in his room, you know, along with him. So, you know, I'd have a little fun while I'm on the boat. So, it's a great story. It's a great book. I don't know if it's still in print. You can find it from time to time. I know I've fallen across it from time to time, and I always grab it if I do. Jesse Jackson, this is going toward the 1940s. Jesse Jackson was a writer for boy books. He was a probation officer who was actually a truant officer, and so he realized that a lot of little black boys were truant all the time. And he would was wondering what was the problem, but it was because they didn't like the books that they were reading, just like I said earlier, because they didn't have anything in common with these characters. So he started writing books for children. So this was the first Jesse Jackson who made a difference. And it's funny, if you all know Curious George, which I know all of you all probably do know Curious George. Curious George, the people who wrote and illustrated, I can't think of their names right now, in their books, they were good friends with Jesse Jackson. So you will see them walking down the street, just in a passing picture, and they'll have a black man with them, and it's Jesse Jackson. So yeah, it's wonderful how illustrators and writers got together and who, you know, what they did. But that's one of the things I just love. I went to Drummond in Mississippi, which is a big collection of archive of children's books and children's history and literature. And they were telling me the story. I was like, wow, this is he looking. I was like, wow, because I hated Curious George as a child. So now I appreciate it now because I'm like, oh, there he is, you know. So now I feel better. There's always something to explain so you can fall in love. Lorenz Graham wrote many books. His family were missionaries, and they had gone to Liberia. And while in Liberia, he had gone back and forth as a missionary. But as a grown man, he went back to Liberia, and he acquired some of the stories. And what happened is, the missionaries, white missionaries who were there before him, they had told them Bible stories. And so they made the Bible stories into mostly folklore, which actually, if we're talking about in the English world, the Bible is under folklore. But they told the stories as if they were folklore. And so he makes them into the way they talk in pidgin. And he's created many books from that. How God Fixed Jonah, Every Man Heart Laid Down, his couple of Song of the Boat is another one. And then he's written several others. And his very popular, very controversial ones are Southtown and Northtown, Boone's Town, Return to Southtown. Those are very popular, and those were books, chapter books. They call them junior novels at the time. And they were very controversial because they talked about families struggling to leave the South and the fights that they had to do, and some, you know, led to death in regards to it. Beautiful book. Lorenz Graham was quite special because he had a sister. His sister was Shirley Graham Du Bois, who is W.E.B. Du Bois's second wife, and she was with him when he passed. And Shirley Graham Du Bois was also a children's writer, and she wrote a lot of biographies. Matter of fact, that's all she wrote. And this is just a listing, a small listing of the books that she wrote. She was in the theater, but she loved children, and so she wrote a lot of biographies just for children. These are some of Langston Lewis's later books. He wrote a lot of nonfiction for children, a lot of nonfiction, and even his Not Thou Laughter. Is that it? What's the title of that? Do you remember? Gosh, I'm gone blank. That's a junior novel. That's for YA, as they put it. With the first book of jazz, the book of rhythm, he has the first book of Africa. He has the first book or the book of that no one ever knew about now. No one knows about now, but at that time they were very big. And they're wonderful and very wonderful to read. I mean, I learned a lot when I picked those books up. But all of this and saying how we've overcome and how the evolution and all this, the evolution was slow in the process. There were still publishing houses that were still putting out derogatory books, even in 1953. And this is one of them. And there was a big series of these. I don't know if anyone remembers these Little Brown Cocoa books. They were almost similar to Little Black Sambo books. And there was a series of them. And everything in it, Little Brown Cocoa's mama was big, fat, black, greasy, you know. This is how they would describe her, you know. And it was just really horrible. But these books were still out at that time, and actually into the 1960s. It was funny, my girlfriend was at a doctor's office, and this was like 10 years ago. She was at a doctor's office, and she was with her kids at a pediatrician. And she looked down at the table, and there was a Little Brown Cocoa book. It's one of the books for the kids to read. She emancipated that book at that time. In the 1960s was a big time for civil rights and the change of literature entirely, especially for children. And one of the most significant pieces of change was a young man at the age of 16 named John Steptoe, who believed that, you know, he didn't see the images of people that look like him in his book. And so he decided, I'm going to make it as no one else does. And so he did. So he created his first book, which is called Stevie. And he did it at the age of 19. It was published. It was finally published. He was 15. When he was 15, he did it. But at 19, it was finally published. And that changed a lot of ways of which we see black children's literature. John Steptoe was the illustrator as well as a writer. And because of John Steptoe, I love John Steptoe. He's one of the reasons why I'm in this field. The great thing about it was he passed away in 1989, but he left a great treasure, which is his son, Javaka. And Javaka is now one of the leading illustrators and writers of children's literature now. And he's done some great things. This is even a little baby book that is the cutest thing. It's one of those squeeze toy things and you flip and, all the Velcro and the whole bit. I love those. I know I can't play with them in public, but, I can do it at home. And he uses mixed media, which is wonderful. So his books are very mixed media. This is basically all clay, a lot of new stuff on this one, and cut out paper and whatever. But he's done many books now, and he's really stepping into a great place. Talking about filling someone's shoes. He filled his father's shoes, and he's straightening them out. So it's wonderful to see his work. He's a great guy, too. And this is wonderful, that when I was small, this is one of my books, and this was Aloneness by Gwendolyn Brooks. Do you all know that book? No one? Gwendolyn Brooks, wonderful person. I met her several times. One of the things I loved about her is the poetry that she did do for children. And that was in my house. Actually, that is my book from my house. And she did several little booklets for children, which people really don't recognize. Another person they don't recognize who wrote a children's book is James Baldwin. He did Little Man, which, of course, is out of print as well. And then we come into the 1970s with some fantastic artists. And Tom Fields just passed away a couple of years ago. And he wrote several books that really showed black children. And he said his children didn't have to smile. The illustrations that he did and the portraits that he did of children, they have a look of potential, of hope. But very few of the children have smiles on their faces. And they're still just beautiful. He took 20 years to do this book, and this is the monument and dedication, basically, to reflect all of Tom's life, which is the middle passage. If you've ever seen this book, please pick it up and look at it. It'll make you cry. There's no words in the book, but it starts off in Ghana and comes all the way into the United States, and it shows people on the slave ships, which is just dynamic. It's just it'll take you away. It really will. And after his death, Kwame Dawes, who was a friend of Tom Field's, was given, before Tom passed away, some of his illustrations. And he said to put them into another book. And so they did. And this is I Saw Your Face, and this came out last year, 2005, January. Text by Kwame Dawes, afterwards by Jerry Pickens, who's another wonderful illustrator. And Kwame puts it as, I see your face wherever I go. And even if I'm in Timbuktu, I see your face. I see your face on the streets of Mississippi, but I also see them in Jamaica. And I see them in London. And it's so true. I've been not all over the world, but I've been in some great places that God has made. And I see black children's faces, and I always say, that looks just like, that sure does, whoa, because of the fact that I see your face all over. But our children don't know it a lot of times. They don't know that they are all over, because it almost makes us feel like they're isolated a lot of times. So this is a beautiful book to pick up. And in 1967, Virginia Hamilton wrote a book called Zelie. Zelie is a wonderful book. I enjoyed that book because Virginia Hamilton is a folklorist. She was a phenomenal writer. She passed away a couple of years ago, too, before Tom did. And she was a phenomenal writer. So is her husband, Arnold Adolph, as a matter of fact. But she wrote a book about a little black girl who goes to visit her uncle in the South for the summer. And she falls in love with this woman that she sees. She admires her so much because of her beauty. She's tall, black as night, and just statuesque. And her name is Zelie. 1967, that was a powerful book to be published. Very controversial, but still powerful enough that it's still in print. So it's a wonderful book, and it's about a coming of age. It's about the little girl who, Elizabeth, who comes into, she and her brother call each other nicknames through the summer. She's called Geeter. But, you know, by the time it ends, she's back to Elizabeth. So it's a great coming of age book in her development and understanding. But she's also written some wonderful, wonderful collections, and that was one of the ones, the one in the middle, The People Could Fly. I think that's, well, many hundreds gone. Yeah, many thousands gone. That book was one of the books that, during the time my son was small, I got because of the fact that that was one of the few that was out, you know, and it was wonderful to read, you know, but you can't read that every night to a child, you know. So she's written some wonderful books. And then we still have Ashley Bryant, and if you ever get to see him, he comes around in the area, Chicago area a lot. He's wonderful. He's a dear person. He's a good friend, I have to say. He has written and illustrated many books. His forte is folklore as well. He has a West Indian background, and so he loves to do this. I know it's faint to see, but this is called The Dancing Granny. And these illustrations were taken from, he used Catherine Dunham's dancing as the model for the Dancing Granny. I study Anansi, which is a folkloric character from North Africa, Ghana. And Anansi comes up to Granny and he wants the food that she's just finished. And so he starts talking to her, and of course, next thing you know, he's got her dancing. And he's got her dancing so much that she's gotten so carried away with dancing that the next thing you know, he's eating up all her food. You know, so he's quite full and satisfied. So he does a lot of folklore. And this is more of his work. And he has also illustrated for Lorenz Graham How God Fixed Jonah. Justice Books is a company that's been out for over 18 years. It's one of the only black children's publishing companies, one of few black children's publishing companies, but it's the longest running one. And all their books are still in press. All their books are still in print. You can go to their website, justicebooks.com. It's all together, no spaces. And go to them. Cheryl and Wade Hudson are wonderful. She's my cousin. So that's a wonderful thing. Well, we don't know how, though. We just know it's Tolsen, and actually it's through my marriage. But they are actually fantastic books, great books on learning, growing up with your children. As we go on and progress into our children's literature during these wonderful times, we've now come into some great books of our sheroes and our heroes. And two of them are Martin's Big Words. It's illustrated by Brian Collier, that's also received an award. And then talking about Bessie, which is Nikki Grimes and Evie Lewis. And it's about the story of Bessie Coleman, who had struggled because she wanted to fly. She wanted to learn how to fly, but she couldn't learn how to fly because she was black and she was a female. So she had two things against her. So Robert Abbott from the Chicago Defender told her that they were teaching women how to fly in France. And so she came up to Chicago and while she was working, she learned how to speak French. And after she learned how to speak French, she was shipped over to France and learned how to fly, and then came back here and did so. Quite impressive. Can you imagine doing all that just to learn how to fly? You know, we talk about, wow, we're struggling just to get to day to day, but you know, all the motivation that she had just to learn how to fly. She learned French. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with languages. I really am not. But she learned how to speak it in order to understand it, in order for her to get something, you know, to get to her goal. And that's a wonderful thing. Great teaching tool. I was watching the Today Show a couple years back, and it was Katie Couric was interviewing this man who was talking about how important it was for our children and our youth and our teens to actually read biographies. Biographies are so important, and that's one of the things we least respect when it comes to literature. And biographies are important because it shows our children how people have struggled to get to where they are. We think everything's microwavable. We put it in the oven and we got Michael Jordan. Actually, excuse me, we don't put it in the oven, we put it in the microwave and we got Michael Jordan. No, Michael had to struggle. He crawled before he walked, but we don't see that a lot of times. What we see is the finished product. Now our kids want to be that because we like the bling bling. But if they realize what it took to get to where they got to, they'd understand better. So it's really wonderful. And I really promote biographies a lot. This is another great biography that I love. Marcinia Tony Stone Lau Alberga. She was with the Negro League, the Negro Baseball League. She played with the Negro Baseball League. There's actually a YA book on her life as well. And the reason why she was with the Negro League was because she could not get into the Women's Baseball League because they didn't allow blacks. So you know that movie, A League of Our Own? You know how important that movie is, and we're always touched about it, yay, right, woo, woo. But at that time, we didn't even know that they would not allow blacks to get in. Now, there's one little piece of that movie where all of a sudden, there's a woman. Gina Davis throws the ball out too far, and there's this black woman in a dress, and she grabs it and throws it back. That was in dedication to her. That one small section, someone had the heart, the guts, and the soul to put that one little piece in just to say thank you to her. Because it's really almost a silent moment, if you ever catch it. She picks it up, throws it back to Gina Davis. Gina catches it, and she just kind of looks at her. And that's all there is. That's to her. Beautiful illustrated book by Lee and Lowe Publishing. In 2000, it was a great, exciting time because they were dedicating a lot of books. 2002, they were dedicating a lot of books to Langston Hughes. 2002, 2007. No, 2002. 2002 had to be because 2007. 2002, and this was the spirit of Langston Hughes. A lot of books were written about Langston Hughes for children at that time, so the children would understand. And this is one of them, Love to Langston. It's by Tony Medina and R. Gregory Christie. Tony Medina is one of my good friends. And what they did was their picture, they decided to take on the stoop of Langston Hughes' house in Harlem. And that's Tony, and that's Gregory right there. So that was really nice. And when they did this, what they also did, they had a block party in Harlem. And they cut off a couple of streets. And he gave out like 100 free books, you know, to celebrate and everything. That was really great. I love Tony for many, many reasons, because he's an animated person. If you could ever get him to your library, you know, actually
in the area?
Well, no, he's in D.C. But actually, I'm trying to bring him in. But if I bring him in, if you pass your information, I'll bring him up. And we did that the last time he came through. And our school system was out spring break, so I was just like, we went all the way to Morton to take him there, and the kids went crazy because he is just so kid-friendly. It's just wonderful. He got a letter from a kid from Boston a couple of weeks ago. And it was a little boy. And the little boy wrote him and said, I liked your book, The Shine Days. It made me really think, and I loved reading it. That's all it wrote. That was all it said. Tony and a couple of his friends drove to Boston. Went into the school. Did I say this? Went into the school. It was the other day he called. He went to the school and, you know, went in and went to the principal's office and asked for the teacher, you know, because the little boy put down, you know, who his teacher was. Asked for the teacher. And the little boy's mother just happened to be in the office to give her son something that day. Can you imagine? Just happened. And so he asked for and Tony is quite animated. Animated doesn't really even describe what he is. He's a live wire, you know. He comes alive, and he's about this tall. And so he went in and he was wild. So they're probably thinking he was a Taliban because that's all he said. Because he's Puerto Rican, black, and you know he's got that look, and he's always stopped in the airport. But anyway, so it's the truth. It's the truth. So Tony was really animated, did a lot of crazy things in the office, and they're like, now who are you? You know, so they actually had the teacher come. The teacher could not believe that he had actually come. And the mother's sitting here, you know, and so they all go to the classroom, And Tony goes up to the little boy, and the little boy's just like, can you imagine? I was crying. I was like, you kidding? Oh, I love you. You know, but he's just that wonderful. So Tony did that for the little boy, and then he looked at it. They took pictures, of course, everybody. And the mother just touched, you know, because her son wrote a letter. That's one, right? That's one. Her son wrote a letter. But two, because the letter got to the right person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? How much of a difference will that letter make for that little boy? A whole world. Because the author came. You know what I'm saying? So when they were taking pictures, Tony looked at the little boy and he said, you know why I'm here? He said, because words are powerful. And they are.
Yeah.
And so he's a great person. I love him. This is another one. This is a beautiful book called Visiting Langston. And Willie Perdomo is the author of this one. And Brian Collier, again, from Mimes Big Word, did the illustrations to this one as well. Willie Perdomo, if you don't watch Deaf Poetry on HBO, if you do, Willie's been on a couple of times. And he's a great person. He's a wonderful person, too. He's also Black Puerto Rican. Wonderful, wonderful lover of children, since he just had one himself recently. This is Jacqueline Woodson. Jacqueline Woodson has written some wonderful historical, they're therapeutic, and they're so realistic. The books are wonderful. These two books especially. Coming on Home Soon is a book that's taken place during World War II, during the time when Rosie the Riveters, women were going to work, and you know, those are the women that I respect highly. My aunt, who just turned 90 a couple of weeks ago, was a Rosie the Riveter. She worked in the factories and the tank plants in Arsenal and Detroit. But women went to work in many places. And this has happened to show a mother who left her daughter to her mother, and she went to work on the railroads up in Chicago. And beautiful story. She gets letters and money sent back and saying, I'm coming home soon. And then just on the other side of that, which is a very powerful book, and this is all talking about biblical therapy. Our children need to see these things because this is the real world. These things really happen. A little girl who lives with her grandmother, don't know where her mother is, but her father's in prison. And she looks forward to the day in which she can go see him, visiting day. It's real. It happens. We do it. We have children who have this situation and this scene, but we don't acknowledge it. We don't talk about it. One of the teachers, I was doing a presentation at the University of Illinois, Urbana, and a school teacher came up and said, I need to tell you about that book. She said, I'm a Christian white woman, you know that? But let me tell you, I keep coming back down off my ladder. You know, she said, because I'm right here with the kids now. You know, she was so funny. I'm like, okay, you have to, all right. And she said, well, let me tell you what happened. The other day, there were two girls in her class. Now, they hadn't been friends before, but that day, they just chatted and chatted and chatted and chatted. They were always together. They were laughing. So she was curious. So she went over to them and asked them, what's going on with you two today? They said, we just found out our fathers are in the same prison. And she said, well, how do you know? She said, we saw each other on visiting day. It's real. It's awesome, isn't it? And one was black and one was white. They got a bond. You know what I'm saying? So that's when we talk about, we need to bring these books out because this is realistic. This is realistic, and we need to bring stuff out. You know, it's hardship. We don't know what he did or what he was in for, but all we know is he loves her and she still loves him. Amen. And her grandmother, his mother, takes him to go see him. It's a beautiful story. Jacqueline Woodson is a phenomenal, award-winning author, both of picture books as well as YA. Miracle Boys is going to be on television in a couple of weeks. You should look for it. That's one of her YA books that is now coming to a movie. And this is the other side, which is during that time, the civil rights movement, during the Jim Crow, where they had property, and the fence was the one that said, you go this way, you go that way. So one would sit on one side of the fence, the other would sit on the other. And finally, they made a compromise, that that's what they would do so they could play with each other. And it's about healing the nation. And Jackie does that pretty well with a lot of her books. This is Freedom on the Menu. We're bringing back our history. in order for us to remember and recall what's going on. Our children need to know. Sometimes we become forgetful. And this is dealing with the Greensboro sit-in. And Blues Journey is another one we need to remember. And it talks about that era during the Civil Rights Movement. It was kind of harsh, well, not kind of, but was harsh. And yesterday a man was lynched, was a sign that the NAACP would put out their window every time they were told that a person had been lynched. So that was quite a certain. Can you imagine passing by and seeing a big old sign? And so that was something that they did on a regular basis as well.
They never talk after you were with your mother all the time. And how good the work felt when you have your back.
I know it's not.
Across so much as the whole family attended meetings about holidays. And
We have a problem.
understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together, and you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand black love is black love. And they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy.
Great children's author, as well as poet, Nikki Giovanni. Actually, I bumped into her last week at the O'Hare Airport. I love going to the airport when you bump into folks. You're like, oh, you know, we had just bumped into Trey Songz, little rapper. I was with some singer, whatever. I didn't think it was a big deal, you know. And I was with students last weekend, and coming from Texas, and we were in O'Hare, and all of a sudden, I knew there was something about the little boy because his persona and his entourage were all different, you know. They all got their hats, you know, their big old jackets on, kind of expensive looking. Going through the airport these days, you know, somebody got to have some money. Anyway, and the little girls go, that's Trey Songz. Let's go Trey Songz. I said, who is that? They're like, go talk to him. We just come from a leadership conference. And I'm like, go talk to him. And I'm like, oh, what? Go. You know, so they ran back, took pictures of him and the whole bit, you know. I'm like, you're happy? You know. So that's what I got out of them. And then we're walking, and we're just a little, you know, way after this. All of a sudden, Nikki Giovanni walks up, and I go like this. I'm just astounded. Nikki Giovanni! Wonderful! But I told him my leadership skills were different. But I did go approach her first song instead of thinking about it, you know. And the girls are still in the background going, Nikki Giovanni! Then no one went up to her, but they were like, oh. So I was like, okay. But it was nice, wonderful seeing her. But she is a great children's author as well. She's written a lot of poetry, but she also has several, well, when I was growing up, there were albums, but I'm actually, they're turning into CDs now, of her reciting children's poetry. Wonderful, wonderful. And these are some of the images of some of our wonderful books. These are our new books. Hewitt Anderson's Great Big Life, and it's almost a Tom story. Tom Thumb story. Jardine Nolan and Kadir Nelson is this one. Bright eyes, brown skin, Jerry Pickney. I Love My Hair, which is a wonderful book. If any of the children you know have issues about their hair, pick this book up. It is just beautiful. It explains so much, and the illustrations are just as beautiful as this one, because I think this is a great explanation of cornrows.
We have that.
Enchanted Hair Tale is a wonderful book, and I was in with this book because of the fact that I have dreadlocks, and you know, it was something to have dreadlocks and, you know, raising children, and I always said, well, see, look, they even approve of my dreadlocks in a book like this. Alexis DeVoe and Cheryl Hannah. And it's just the beauty of Cheryl Hannah's illustrations, but the ending illustration is the most beautiful to me because of the fact that there's a lion reflecting back in the mirror of this little boy. And just the beauty of all of it. And there's little angel cherubs around the outside on the wall. And that one represents, I think, everything that I have in regards to just talking about black love, because he's from a black family who just loves them, and you see the pictures of the black family, and just the power of how important children's literature really is. Thank you. Very, very much. Do you all have any questions, or?
No, I was actually about to leave. I'm leaving her a note to ask her to get in touch with you. I was at Borders trying to look up books for you, and they said, well, we probably can't find it because it's probably university press.
Oh, mine?
Yeah.
A book, it's mine?
Didn't you write books?
Yes, I have one, but I have a book that's coming out in a couple of months, that is actually on black children's literature, the power of black children's literature. Black children's literature got the blues, which is basically a very layman's term book, which is wonderful. I'm gonna cut this off so I can pull this out. Wonderful book. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm gonna put this asleep then.
So you're,
I need a picture of something that's got good, you know, that's right
Oh, okay.
with you standing next to
Oh, okay. So that one, but Tales of Africa is, you can get on Amazon. It's a folklore collection that I did years ago. And I had a lot of articles out all over the place. But when it comes to my own book, come out in a couple of months.
now is that through the University Press?
No, actually it's through Peter Lane. Peter Lane.
And what's the title of it again?
Black Children's Literature Got the Blues.
Now, will people be able to get that at Borders or?
I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
If you all ordered as much as possible, yeah, they will.
But they,
It's only gonna be $28. It's not gonna be.
It's not out yet, because
No.
they didn't have you at all in these systems.
Oh, well, Borders, no, they wouldn't. Borders isn't the best supporter of people of color when it comes to books anyway. You know, I'm trying to be nice.
A lot, and they don't have this, they don't
But
have
this,
that.
this border out here, because the neighborhood is changing, they support a lot of black authors. I've gone there, and
Okay.
authors have been able to.
But not children's books, not the way they do adult books.
Yeah, actually, that's where we started. We started at Borders.
Oh,
Borders
really?
started in Michigan.
Okay.
So it was at Borders when we used to go to Borders. I know you don't remember. But we used to go to Borders all the time, and that's where I first started, and then I ended up going to a cultural center. But it will be. All you have to do when it comes out, is just request it. Please. I would be on my knees if I could. Get down there.
I thought that
Do
was
you have a bibliography of the book that you mentioned in your presentation?
I do, but I don't have it on me. If you email me, I can send it to you. Okay, I can, really.
I appreciate it.
I want to thank you for coming out, because I think your story, when I received something from the Historic Society, I thought it was very interesting, first of all, because I have a 15-year-old that I said yes to be able to come here today as my Girl Scout troop. But I faced the same thing. I was looking for a black book specific to him. So what I started doing is just making up stories. But we were able to purchase books that I passed down to his sisters, but of course we have grown, but this was very, very.
But you know, there's so many wonderful older books now for black kids.
Yeah, it is now, but,
Yeah,
but
I know.
well, I mean, 15 years ago, it was very
It was 20 years ago, so you know how I was doing, so I understand.
I'm sure on the same timeline here. I'm an educator, and I started teaching here in Chicago after I came back from Texas A&M University, where I went. Yeah, and went to my old grammar school. Oh, really? Yeah, no.
No, girl, it was in the 60s, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I finished there in '89.
Yeah.
And when I came back, I went to my old grammar school, and I had a journalism undergrad, but I needed to get a job where I could really make money. So I went and did education and got my master's, but
Wonderful.
I would go with I had a 5th grade group for 10 years, I teach age now. I went to Whitson Library, and I just went crazy with all of these books. So I would go in there with an orange milk carton, and I said, what's the maximum? I didn't know that you take out 25 books at a time.
Wow.
And I had the Flossie and the Fox,
Oh,
and
yeah,
Fox,
Rachel,
Mr.
you
Garden,
did
and
that.
and I had to check out the books that I checked out
There you
from the
go.
library, and so I went crazy, and then as the book orders came in, I started ordering for this imaginary child I didn't have.
Okay.
So I have all these books that
Right, she's ashamed. It's okay.
Yeah.
Come out the closet, girl.
She's 6 now.
Okay.
But, you know, it was just crazy because I'm getting what I like for this child that I didn't even have.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
But I think the same thing, you know, happened to me, and now
A lot of mothers.
Oh, yeah, and I shared this with those 10-year-olds that I had, and I made sure that they got these books that I didn't even know existed.
Oh, yeah, but you know what you should do, and this is a big recommendation for everybody. Use bookstores, not use bookstores, but library book sales.
Okay.
Yeah.
Library book sales are the best, I don't know where your library is, and I really don't want to know it, because,
Mine is a full library, and right.
oh, it's next door? Oh,
Yeah.
I really don't want to know where she is. No, you know, the public library book sales
Yeah.
are the best. I'm so a bookaholic. I'm going to go to a
I'm
bookaholic
addicted to it.
anonymous one day, but no time soon. But I am a bookaholic, and what I do is I became such a bookaholic that I decided to become a friend of the Bloomington Public Library, thing, organization. But I was such a bookaholic, I couldn't just be the friend. I became a member on the council. I mean, so I am there while we're putting those books away. You should see. I have a Volkswagen and get packed really easy.
I would speak out the house to go.
I know, and I just brought home, we just finished, actually, today is our $3 a bag day, book sale, and tomorrow's free, so I'm trying to resist not going. But, that's one of the things, going and getting those books, you'd be surprised what you'll find. I found one of Arnold Bontem's first children's books. I found a stack, they had at Iowa a stack of albums when we were living in Iowa. They had a stack of albums, children's albums, 50 cents an inch. You know how they stack the albums. And you know what I got? Langston Hughes, reading his own poems.
Wow.
Nikki Giovanni, Jackie Torrance, all these books, albums. And I still have a turntable, so it's a wonderful thing. And now they have it where you can convert your turntable, your albums into CDs. Yeah. Depends on where you go. And our tech place has it. So I do that all the time, but look for public book sales, public library book sales. Those are bargain places. Because you would be surprised, especially, I hate to say, in white areas,
That's what I'm
they
thinking.
will release black books very quickly because no one's checking them out. But some of the great authors for little boys, because I see little girls reading, is Christopher Paul Curtis.
Yeah.
Christopher Paul, I love him.
And
I love him. Yeah, but Bud, not Buddy. And then Sarge, Buck and the Sarge is his newest book. Oh, he's hilarious. He's hilarious. And he's a great guy, too. And that's another thing. I love being in the mix of, most of the people that we saw today aren't my friends. I can say when I last time I saw them or last time I talked to them, because of the fact that this is my life, and they are the reason for it. But it was real important for me to get really into it. And being in a field, you get exposed to all these people, and they're just so reachable. All these people are reachable. They really are. If you really want them, they're reachable. Except for the dead ones, they're not reachable. But Javaka has lifted his fear of flying, so he's reachable. All those things. Because once you get to a point, you have to move on. But there are some wonderful, wonderful illustrators and authors that will really do wonders, especially the male ones bringing them in. They're so good for the male children.
And how would you recommend someone interested? Like I mentioned, I have a journalism undergrad, and I always said I want to write, but how would someone interested in putting together a book, a series of books, who would they see for something like this to get started? We have recommendations of publishing companies.
Lee and Lowe. Lee and Lowe has a good contest.
They do, every fall, for writers of color.
Thank you.
But actually, I'm a commercial message. I'm the network rep for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.
Right there.
First Thursday of the month. Over here at the Borders, and it's a wonderful organization to join if you're really interested.
Now, are you the local, or are you the one in this whole area?
We cover the whole South suburban area.
Oh, okay.
But then we also, the Illinois chapter also meets in Chicago area.
This is wonderful.
But Lee and Lowe has a very good writing contest every year, every October.
Right. And really writing contests, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's how Christopher Paul Curtis got his start.
And Milton Taylor.
He entered a writing contest and didn't win, but the editor called him and said, I want to buy, and that was the Watson's Go to Bourbon. Very honorable.
And what I do is I do that book, and I also show Three Little Girls. Which is, I have to leave the room when I show Three Little Girls. But, for my students who are new in life, You know, I'll let them read that, and then I'll have them watch that, and I walk out.
Yeah.
You know, because I can't take it anymore. You know, it's
Yeah, my
beautiful.
kids can't graduate without reading that. They give it, and we do the whole thing.
Yeah, and Spike Lee did an excellent job. No one gives him as much credit as they should, but the four little girls was just a phenomenal piece, and it just attaches so well to that book. But he is a great writer. But you know, Mildred Taylor won a writing contest. And in the 70s, she wrote and I know, isn't that phenomenal? And from that, she tells her whole life. You know, all the Circle Being Broken, The Well, The Gold Cadillac, all those books that she's written, and even the prequel, you know, the last one. Yeah, and you know, so she's phenomenal. So there are some great writing contests.
Right.
And it's funny, he didn't win, but he won.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you. She didn't win.
Yeah, and the website's on the back there,
Okay.
so.
Also, in this local area, we have a illustrator, Chance Mexico.
Oh yeah, I know Jan.
Yeah, she comes to our school a couple of times.
Wonderful.
That's another author to really, well, she really is more of an
Illustrator,
illustrator, and
she
she
is.
illustrates usually for Eloise.
At Greenfield, right. And they've redone some of the books.
They've redone they had a 25th, they redid Me and Me.
That's right.
And, which is a wonderful book about a little girl with an imaginary friend, I'm sure you know it.
Right.
And, they've redone that on the 25th anniversary.
Yeah. So
In fact, they used models from my school.
Oh,
She came to my school and she said, "You have the most beautiful children here," which of course we do. And
you're not biased.
two of our little girls were the models for that book.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool. And it's dedicated to them in the front.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I teach at Woodgate School in 159 on Yardburn.
Wonderful. Yeah. See, those are the special things. Those are wonderful things to know.
Yeah, like you said, these little girls, they'll never, ever
Never.
forget that.
Yes.
She was just in our family reading.
Wonderful. That's just like Augusta Baker. I did my master's thesis on Augusta Baker's, the whole history of Augusta Baker and the school, the book collection. And I had to call her because she was still alive. And I called her and I was just like in awe. You know, it was one of those things like a child in a candy store. It's like, you know. And she was just wonderful, you know. And I do storytelling also. And she passed away the year that I graduated with my PhD, which I thought was so profound. And, you know, and I was doing storytelling 2 years ago up in Eureka. I don't know if you all even know where Eureka is. But it was made up of all these little, old, beautiful white women. These women were just adorable. So it was in a church. So I'm sitting in the church waiting, and we did it in the sanctuary part. So I'm sitting in the sanctuary, just waiting, just kind of meditating until everybody's finished, because it was they were having a fall festival or something. And so these women come in. One leans over to me and grabs my shoulders real hard. She said, "Speak loud." And I said, "Okay." You know, I'm kind of scared. I was like, "Oh, this isn't a good sign." Okay. So 3 of them sit behind me. And so I get up and I start telling stories, and they're wonderful. The response in the room, the spirit in the room, something like this one, is just really welcoming and wonderful and warm. And they, afterwards, the 3 that I thought were going to be my trouble, came up to me. They all hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. One of them comes up to me and she says, "You know what? You remind me of Augusta Baker." "Oh, do you know Augusta Baker?" I'm almost in tears. You know, I'm like, "Yes." Wow. She said, "Well, I said, "Yes, I know her." I said, "She passed away." She said, "Oh, I figured she was, yeah, that's about right." I used to work underneath her as a librarian. In Eureka, Illinois, where you coming from? You know? And so she said, "Yes, I was in New York. I lived in New York, and I was a librarian." She just went on, and I'm sitting there almost in tears. You know, I'm trying to keep myself together. She's just wonderful. Then the next one, who told me to speak loud, she said, "I just love African stories." And I'm like, uh-oh. I have a little trouble with her. She said, "When I was living in Tanzania," who are you? You know, every one of them they were just so special. But you never know who you're going to run across, and who knows who. But just for her to say, she worked with Augusta Baker, I was in awe. You know, but just, you know, you never know, and how warm things are. So it was just a privilege. I mean, this has been a learning journey for me that I hope is, you know, I've got miles to go before I sleep. But it's just been wonderful, and you know, this is why I share it with everybody, because these books are wonderful, not just for this month, they're for every month, because our children are Black 365.
Absolutely.
So we have to make sure we know that, and they know that. Because my kids will say, uh-oh, no longer Black.
Yeah.
Ours first. Yeah, I'm in this one again, you know. So it's very important for them to get these books every
Do you
month.
have, cards
I do. I'll give them a little first.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This is really, very exciting program for us.
Okay.
And I would
Yeah,
have
my alma mater.
you could